Please welcome my guest today, CP van Wyk from Team Insect Science. Today we're discussing fueling an ultra-marathon race and specifically using PVM products. Now, CP is well qualified to discuss the topic. He's got multiple top 3 and top 10 finishes in South Africa's ultra-marathon races. In 2022, he came second in Race to the Sun. He was the winner of the 361 half marathon in 2022, multiple Cape Epic finishes, Ottaquas finishes in the top 10, several wins. So no one is more qualified to discuss how to fuel ultramarathons and share some well-tested insight and experiences with us. CP, welcome to this discussion.
Hi, Carl. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Look forward to having a chat about nutrition with you guys.
And we're looking forward to hearing from you. CP, let's jump straight in and talk about the principles of fueling. Just from a base perspective, how do you approach your planning of fueling? And when I talk fueling throughout this discussion, I'm referring to nutrition as well as hydration. So how do you go about this? Are you very scientific? Do you read articles? Do you build spreadsheets? Or do you just go on your gut and drink when you're thirsty?
Yeah. No, so I would say it's quite specific or scientific. Fueling, I would normally refer to fuel on the bike as carbs. So carbs is the fuel, and when we plan a ride, I would generally look at how long it would take me to finish the ride, work on an estimate of normally about 90 grams of carbs an hour, and then if it takes me 4 hours, then that's 360 grams of carbs. The hydration would more be on what is available. So if I know I've got a 3-hour ride, I will plan to at least carry 2 bottles and split it in half, a bottle per hour and a half. But yeah, hydration is a bit more tricky than the fuel itself. So that's more based on availability, and the fuel you can plan easy.
And CP, how do you get to 90 grams per hour?
There's quite a bit of research that's been done on that. They say between 60 and 120 grams of carbs is what your body can metabolize each hour. And it's actually something you can train. So you can train your gut to stomach that all and to actually absorb it. It's also the ratio of carbs. I think it's 2-to-1. Glucose, fructose is the ideal ratio that they say you get the optimal absorption rate. So I know some of the Norwegian triathletes are pushing 120 grams of carbs an hour. I haven't really gotten to that yet. I would normally advise someone to start off with 60 grams and then push it up. I've gotten to 90, and that's about where I find my limit right now. But yeah, I still feel like you can't put in as much food at the same rate as you're burning. So yeah, the more the better.
CP, tell me, how does this change? Once again, the principles. How does this change for longer and shorter rides? So, for example, if you do a 4-hour zone 2 ride, as opposed to a 2 or 3 hour trail seeker flat out sprint, how do the principles change for how you calculate? Do you still work on 90 grams per hour, even if it's a long zone 2 ride, or if it's a sprint, or how do you adapt?
No, so obviously if you're going full gas, then you are burning as fast as your body can access fuel. So then you want to be taking the maximum amount that you can stomach. On a zone 2 ride, I would normally say 50 grams, maybe 60 grams an hour. I think the longer you go from your previous meal, the more you need to take in. So, I mean, if you just had breakfast and you're going for a 3-hour ride, then you don't need to be taking 60 grams an hour, I feel. But also, if you do run out of fuel, it also worsens your recovery period after. So that's why I always take fuel on board, even if it's just in my bottles, just so you don't end up being empty and risk being tired the next day.
So CP, I'm a average weekend rider, and I go on my standard Saturday morning 2 to 3 hour ride, doing maybe 60 k's, having a coffee. Should I be eating anything at all, even for and maybe on Sunday I'm going to do a 1 hour ride? Should I be eating anything, or am I actually just overeating if I eat anything on a 2 to 3 hour ride?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Technically, you'd probably be fine just riding on water if you are reasonably fit. I have found that if I end up just riding on water, then the rest of the day I'm crazy hungry and just eat everything. So if your goal is to lose weight and not take in too much calories, then riding on just water might just make you more hungry for the rest of the day and you'll end up eating more. So I wouldn't advise it, but I do get why some people do it. I just don't think it's the best thing. At least just have something.
So let's talk about training for eating. Do you do specific training rides where you measure your burn and your heart rate, and you calculate what you're going to eat, and you eat maybe different types of food or bars, and you see how your body's reacting? Do you actually do training rides so that you get used to what you're going to eat and drink, or do you have you figured out that formula and you don't do that much? Maybe you did that in the beginning. So just your view on training for nutrition.
So yes, I would normally, if I do high intensity training, I would approach it as if it's a race in terms of nutrition. So I'll have a gel as I roll out the garage, and then say I do 5 times 10-minute intervals. I'll have a gel before each interval and kind of push the limit and see how much I can take in. Like I said, I think the more you can stomach, the better. And you definitely get used to it. So high intensity days I'll approach as if it is a race. I'll sometimes do a 3-hour like tempo zone 3 ride, which I'll also visualize myself doing a 3-hour race, start off with whatever I would do on race day. And even though the intensity isn't exactly as it would be in a race, it's a bit easier to focus on eating and getting it in and seeing what works for you. I also find that the longer you ride, the harder it becomes to stomach all these things. For a 2 or 3 hour ride, it's difficult, but once it gets to like 5 hours plus, then that 10th gel doesn't go down as sweet as it did in the first 2 hours. So I'm actually constantly trying new things, be rice cakes or more real world food. I find is a good alternative to just having gels, or at least just have energy bars and not just gels. The gels do burn your stomach, I think. But yeah, so yeah, to answer your question, I would approach high intensity training days as a race, fuel it that way. And my more chill zone 2 rides, I would back it down a bit. I don't think you can be eating 20 or 30 gels a week. That's not healthy.
So what I hear you saying is a good mix of simulation of real world races and situations, combined with some experimenting to try and refine that formula.
Yeah, exactly.
And then tell me, pre-race, let's say the day or 2 to 3 days before, how do you approach that from a fueling perspective? Do you carbo load, or have a big steak, or just eat what you normally eat? Do you do something special for carbo loading?
No, not really. I tend to stick to my normal diet. I would say I would try to not overeat the night before. That I've found in the past isn't a good idea. But yeah, just sticking to what you know works. I've often seen people doing funny things before a race and then it just backfires. Your tummy's not used to it, or yeah, I don't know. I'm not too big a believer in carbo loading to that extent, because I feel like your tank is only that big. So it's like you're gonna stretch it by eating 3 pizzas. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And then race day. With all these ultra races coming out, let's use a longer kind of race, 10 hours plus, as an example for race or for this discussion. How do you go about planning? Let's say it's a Cullinan Tonteldoos or maybe 361, a 10-hour plus. How do you go about planning for that? You mentioned earlier 90 grams. So do you have a piece of paper and you go 90 grams times 10 hours? Means 2 bars per hour, 1 bottle. How do you go about planning? How do you approach it for a race?
Yeah, so I would say look at Cullinan to Tonteldoos and say think it's about 10 hours, and then look at where the possible fuel stops are. Generally, you'd get around 40 grams of carbs in a bottle of, say, Octane or whatever energy drink you're having. Gels are normally around 25 grams. Bars are normally around 40 grams. And I also know that when you're racing, you're not really very good at math. So it's better doing that beforehand. So I figured out that if I can have a bottle, a gel, and a bar every hour, that could be like over 100 grams then. So generally, I would say have a bottle every hour or hour and a half, and just make sure that I stick something in my mouth, whether it be a bar, a gel, or something I get at a fuel stop every half an hour. Because when you do get tired, you tend to forget to eat. So that's the plan. And so when I visualize this beforehand, I'll pack out 10 gels and say, okay, well, hour 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, however long you're going, and then pack out 10 gels. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's not too much science, but it's just picturing what you're going to do beforehand, and then it's pretty easy to get to a number of what you need. Obviously, you can't carry 20 of each in your pocket. That's not reasonable. So if you get to a water point, just whatever there is, make sure it's something.
So tell me about that, the logistics of getting all that food to the right place at the right time for your race. Do you plan with your seconds to meet you at, let's say, for example, water point 1 or water point 2, and then you quickly grab a small bag of that contains what you need, like a little musette, with 2 bars, like they do at the Tour de France, 2 bars and 2 bottles, and off you rush. Do you carry all of it with you? For example, on Tonteldoos, I mean, would you have a support person at every water point, or maybe only at halfway, and then you top up? How do you go about the logistics of getting the food to? Because you never know. Now that PVM's a sponsor at the water points, it's easy to know what you're going to get there. But if there's not a named sponsor, you may get fruitcake or bananas or birthday cake or something which is not exactly what you would. So how do you plan that logistics?
It depends on the event. I'm not sure with Tonteldoos, but I think you're only allowed 1 point where you can have outside assistance. Regardless, it depends on where you are allowed to have someone give it to you. The first prize is always if you can have your own bottles and your own gels or whatever you are used to, and your seconds just give it to you. So I would normally chuck my bottles and say, put some tape around a bar and a gel and stick it to my spare bottle. So I just have one thing to grab, and on the bike, I can just pull it off the bottle. I don't grab a musette because you can't just chuck that in the bush. So it's a bit big. In the road race, that would work. But I mean, if you can't have a second, then you have to make do with what they give you at the water points.
And then, Sepia, I want to ask this from the point of view of an amateur. I find, for example, on a race like, let's say, 250K or an ultra kind of race, the second half of the race, because maybe I'm not trained well enough, my heart rate comes down significantly from the first half of the race. So let's say, for example, I could ride it between 75 and 80% for the first half. The second half, I would maybe struggle to get to 75%. I'd be riding at 70% heart rate, just because I'm not well enough trained or exhausted or whatever the case may be. And in that case, I need a lot less fuel in the second half than I did in the first half. And how do you advise people to plan? Because if you keep eating at 70% heart rate, you're going to get sick probably, or feel bloated or something. How do you advise people to approach, or maybe let's say the less fast riders to approach that plan?
Well, I think if your heart rate starts dropping, then you've probably already eaten too little. That's kind of a mini bonk. So ideally, you don't want your heart rate to be dropping towards the end, because that's fatigue and running out of energy. Yeah, it's difficult to advise someone to eat less. I wouldn't normally do that. So yeah, rather just focus on, I mean, at least eating something every 30 minutes just to top up that blood sugar levels. And yeah, that's my advice.
Okay, thanks. I'll remember that. I'll remember that next time my heart rate drops to 70%. And let's talk about post race. So the race is finished. You're done. Do you dive? Let's say from your perspective, do you dive into grab a beer and a pizza? How seriously do you take? And I guess it would differ from stage races to one-day races. How serious do you take what you do when you get to the finish line, and from a recovery perspective?
Well, in a stage race, it's obviously more serious than in a one-day event. If it's just a one-day race, I'll generally try and grab a beer. But on a stage race, you want to be eating or drinking a recovery drink as fast as possible. That first 30-minute window after you finish your workout is when your body's absorbing the most. So you want to fuel it then. I would generally just grab a recovery drink right away, and then within an hour or so also try and have a proper meal.
And which PVM product do you use for recovery?
It's the Reignite.
Okay, right.
Yeah. And during normal training weeks, I'll try and have a protein shake before bedtime as well.
And once again, the question from the backmarker's perspective, I go on my 2 to 3 hour coffee ride on a Saturday morning, and I've eaten 3 bars and 90 grams carbs in this 3 hour ride. And then I get home, and because someone told me on a YouTube video that I should have a recovery drink, I have a recovery drink after a 2 hour ride, and get my another 90 grams of carbs in, and a beer and a pizza, and then I feel happy because I have done the recovery thing. How would you advise someone doing the 2 to 3 hour coffee ride on a Saturday morning to do recovery, or is no recovery actually required?
Well, the recovery drink tastes pretty good, so I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but probably not necessary. I still think the best thing you can do is just to eat something like real food. The recovery drink is just a substitute for, no one can practically have a meal ready within 10-15 minutes after training. But I mean, if I go training early in the morning, I would probably skip my recovery drink if I were to eat breakfast right away after. So,
well, CP, on that note, I'm getting hungry now with all this talk about food. So thank you very much, CP, for joining me today and providing some very valuable insights on how to go about planning your fueling and your nutrition for different kinds of rides. And I'm sure everybody's going to find this very helpful. Thank you for your time, CP.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Hopefully some other guys can also share their tips and maybe some rice cake recipes or something.